I want to start off this week with a confession. Sometimes it can be a little stressful prepping to interview a guest on this podcast. When I started this podcast, I was a guy who had lived next to Illinois corn and bean fields growing up, but I've never lived on one. I've never worked on one. So it can be kind of intimidating to have a guest on here who has spent his or her entire life in agriculture. So I always bring an outsider's curiosity to this American Farm Landowner podcast, but it's been absolutely fascinating to talk with so many passionate people about this industry. Now, I've covered politics for like 30 years. Well, this week here on the podcast, I get to mix some politics with some ag, and it will include some ideas about how to help families primarily in rural areas. Hi, I'm Dave Price. Well, this week's guest is Iowa Senate Majority Leader Mike Klimesh, and the senator believes that he and his colleagues have come up with an idea that could be a new source of revenue for rural families, and it could eventually help many other people as well. Senator, welcome. Appreciate you joining us. How are you?
I'm doing good this morning, Dave. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invite.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about your background. You served as mayor in the booming metropolis of Spillville, Iowa. What is Spillville all about?
Spillville was all about the Billy Clocks and Anton Dvorak, the famous Czech composer, spent the summer of 1893 with us. We have a beautiful museum in the center of town that showcases the hand-carved clocks of the Beely brothers, which were two bachelor brothers that farmed outside of Spillville and spent their winters carving magnificent clocks. Spillville also has claim to fame of the Inwood Ballroom, which is like one of 6 remaining ballrooms left. The Inwood Ballroom had the Byrds, Canned Heat back in the day, lots of great 70s and 60s rock and roll artists, and they're on the Iowa Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as well. And it's just a beautiful little town in northeast Iowa on the Turkey River. Population of about 385 people on a good year. So, it's just a beautiful place. I've called it home my whole life.
Do you or any of your relatives have any direct experience in farming?
I do. Actually, I grew up on a farm. My folks farmed until the early 90s on a Century farm. We didn't live on the farm, but we ran a cow-calf operation, and then my folks sold it in the early 90s. They both worked off the farm as well. So, but yes, worked on the farm, grew up on a farm. Lots of small square bales. That was my dad. He was like, we're only going to do, I've got you can stack on the wagon. This is good. I don't need to buy any more fancy equipment. Let's work. So, great experience.
And that has to help you a lot. You do have some colleagues in the Iowa legislature who still actively farm, and while as a state, numbers-wise, there aren't nearly as many people actively farming as there were when your folks were kind of growing up in the industry, but it's still a vital part of the state's agriculture. Is this what piqued your curiosity to look at whether there are ways for farmers to get more financial benefit out of their soil?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're always looking for ways to add value to Iowa agricultural products and to help add value to Iowa farmers in general. I mean, that's an important part of it. Meeting their input costs at the end of the season when they harvest. Those things are all important considerations. And with Iowa being an ag state and a huge chunk of our GDP, it's even more important that the legislature we take and be beneficial to them.
So you have been right in the thick of things in a very deep, personal, passionate years-long conversation about eminent domain. And primarily that has involved this carbon sequestration pipeline. But because of those discussions, that also becomes part of these overall discussions when you're looking at hydrogen extraction too. Can you kind of walk us through what that whole process has been like? You as the leader of the Senate, you have tried to thread a needle here, especially when it comes to the pipeline, about helping the producers who see some benefit in this carbon pipeline with balancing property rights. That is a heck of a thing to try to balance. Can you walk us through a little bit about how you tried to navigate that and how deeply personal and passionate this topic's been?
Yeah, so when we talk about geologic hydrogen, we talk about underground resources and minerals. We talk about pooling orders typically, right? And those pooling orders are how landowners join together to form an underground pool of resources. So we had code sections in the book that dealt with pooling orders, but Iowa is not a state that has had access to underground natural resources. So those code sections were antiquated, right? They were not keeping pace. Other states like, Oklahoma, and Wyoming, North and South Dakota, Pennsylvania, even Texas, we looked at those states, looked at their pooling order language in their code sections, and said, okay, Iowa needs to bring this up to speed, right? And part of it was for landowner protections. Because in our existing code section, prior to the bill we passed this last year, if a landowner was encompassed in a pooling order, the cost recovery method from the driller was a lien on their property. There was no landowner protections. There was no surface restorations in our code sections. All those things are extremely important to landowner protections. And those landowners enter into agreements with drilling companies to explore underground for hydrogen. We want to make sure the landowners had the keys to those conversations and they were in the driver's seat. And so threading those needles without disincentivizing companies from coming into Iowa to drill and explore, it gets very touchy. But I think the bill we passed this year, again, looking at other states that have been, dealing with underground resources and minerals for years gave us a lot of clarity kind of as to what direction we should move. So the bill we passed this year actually dealt with landowner protections on multiple levels. The surface order pooling, you have to have at least 25% that's voluntary, so it can't be all non-voluntary. We crafted a very good section in that bill that dealt with surface owner restoration. So the landowner can dictate exactly the terms they want once the drilling company has sunk the well, and moved on to someplace else. And all those things are extremely important for those landowners, right? And it's important to make sure that while they can benefit from this, they also have protections.
And can you explain this a little bit? So let's say you and I are the neighbors here, and I agree to let the company go into my property. Then where this works is that as they're in mine and they're tunneling under mine and they want to then explore into yours, is that where this kicks in?
Yeah, actually, I think it's more vertical drilling straight down. So if
Okay.
they come to you and say we'd like to put an exploratory well on your property, we're not sure what we're going to find because we're hunting and pecking right now for hydrogen across the state, right?
Sure.
They're doing geological surveying, trying to find underground rock structures that would give them a location to sink a well. So they go to Dave and they say, hey, we see a dome underneath your property potentially here, and we'd like to access it. So they drill a test well and they find hydrogen. And so now what they're going to do is they're going to think, okay, hydrogen doesn't just exist under your land because it's a huge geologic dome that is containing this. And so I'm your neighbor. So they're going to go to me and say, hey, we found hydrogen, but the pool also exists under your property, Mike. And so we want to make a pooling order to encapsulate all the landowners that are in the pool geographically where we think they lie to make sure that everybody gets compensated for the hydrogen. Because even though they drilled on your property, excuse me, and struck a pool, that pool also will land underneath my property. But if they don't come to me and say, hey, we want to encompass you in the pooling order, well, then Dave would get all the benefit of the hydrogen, and the surrounding landowners who would have that pool underneath their property would kind of be left out in the cold, right? So it's important to kind of draw that. So once they drill that, then they're going to do survey wells. Once they find, what appears to be a high flow hydrogen deposit, they'll drill survey wells. And so before they have the ability to drill survey wells, to establish the size of the pool, they need to connect with landowners and establish that pool. Then that mechanism takes place at the Department of Natural Resources, which it always has in our code section. So the DNR has control over establishing the pooling order. And with the new parameters we put in the bill this year, it guarantees that at least 25% of those folks in that pool have to be voluntarily in the pool.
Okay, I know you're a heavy podcast consumer, so you listen a lot of deep dives into stuff. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I have a feeling you probably already know this. So the science part of this, how do they know that my farmland is a good candidate for this? How do they know that from afar? There's got to be something they know. I can't imagine they're just throwing a dart at a map, right?
No, they're not. So, when the Earth was forming, back when the plates were moving around, Iowa sits on a rift, right? And as Iowa was forming. Iron-rich rock is about 8,000 feet underneath our feet in Iowa. And that same iron-rich rock then rises to the surface in the Minnesota Iron Range. So if you can imagine where the Minnesota Iron Range exists and they harvested iron there, then take that and then just dive it down underneath the earth, and in about 8,000 feet under Iowa, there's iron. So what they know is, and the first time I heard about this was about 4 years ago. I happened to stumble across a small United States Senate subcommittee hearing that was talking about hydrogen development. They had 4 panelists, like half a dozen senators in there.
That's an exciting life you lead, where
I
you
did
just
is.
stumbled upon this.
In my obsession, yes, I stumbled across it, watched it. At that time, testifying was the CEO of Koloma, which is one of the companies doing exploration in Iowa. And they were talking about geologic hydrogen.
Okay.
And hydrogen is an extremely small molecule, much like helium. And so scientists initially thought that the Earth couldn't contain it, right? That once the hydrogen molecule formed underground, that it would find its way to escape to the surface. Now, in Australia, where they're a few years ahead of us in hydrogen exploration and development, they have a higher propensity of hydrogen coming to the ground, and they call them fairy circles in Australia, because as the hydrogen comes up, it kills the grass or the surface area, and it's pretty identifiable, and it's usually in a circle for some reason. I'm not sure what the science is behind that, but they call them fairy circles. So what they realized was that shale domes could contain hydrogen, right? The shale was a capstone. And so where the shale exists in a capstone environment, the hydrogen can come up to the top of the shale, but it can't escape beyond that point. So what we had occurring underground was we had the iron-rich rock, we had a high level of water. So when the water would contact the iron-rich rock, the water would oxidize the rock up a level, taking the oxygen molecule to essentially rust the rock one more level, leaving pure hydrogen. So Mother Nature's been making this underneath the earth, just kind of cooking along with the process. And so fast forward ahead 3 years, we now know that Mother Nature is continuing to make this process for us. And the great thing about Iowa, when these companies are looking for the possibility of having hydrogen, they want to see the activation level of the iron-rich rock. So when they started to drill in Iowa, they realized that the iron-rich rock underneath our soil has been 100% activated, which means that it has taken that water, it has consumed the oxygen molecule, leaving hydrogen. So then the search is, how can we find these shale domes, these geologic domes under the earth that can provide that capstone and contain it? And they do that using ground-penetrating geological surveys. So they drive along Iowa's gravel roads, and they do ground penetration, and they find these underground rock structures. And when they find these shale domes or these domes, then they're drilling there, because those are the locations that have captured the hydrogen and retained it, that will give them the most, high flowable, high purity level of hydrogen from the ground.
Can you explain what this is? So forward-thinking stuff. Can you explain what it was like early in the process, as you are sitting with your fellow legislators explaining this stuff? And I'm not trying to be patronizing to anybody else. I'm thinking from my own level that if I'm sitting next to you, I'm like, dude, I don't understand any of this. But you were in a position where you frequently have to do this, right? You, at the beginning of a session, legislative session, you identify members in your caucus and think, okay, this guy is good at this. He should be in charge of this. She's good at this, blah, blah, blah. So you kind of have to become experts or appoint experts in a lot of different areas and figure out legislation, right? So as you're talking about this sort of cutting edge, new edge stuff, how do you explain to your colleagues that, hey, this is kind of out there, but this is what this could really mean for this state? Like, how do you bring everybody up to speed? Because everybody doesn't have the time and commitment that you do to deep dive this stuff. Right? I was
That's a
being
great
kind.
question. No, that's a great question. And I think that the first time I tried to explain it to him, there was a lot of what the heck's this guy talking about? And and I understand that, right? So sure. Trying to simplify that conversation down, and then we had the fortunate, of having Senator Sweeney and Senator Zumba actually go to a hydrogen conference. We sent them out to Wyoming 2 years ago, I think. And that was kind of focused on hydrogen. At that time, it was not necessarily geologic hydrogen, because if we recall, the Biden administration had a push to make green hydrogen, which would have been made using green energy. And then, of course, the process that's occurring underground, you can duplicate that process, but it's an extremely energy intensive process to crack that molecule to get the hydrogen. So we had an understanding of what hydrogen was. We know that it's a great fuel source, and when you burn it, you have water left. I mean, that's the only byproduct you get left out of it. So the fuel source under Iowa, I believe the Department of Energy's estimates are under the United States, potentially holistically with hydrogen development, could be 400 years of energy for us underneath there that we could actually burn in turbines and provide power for. But so then we started talking more and more, and then we started to see more and more about where hydrogen could have a play in Iowa in our ag economy, right? So hydrogen, when it comes out of the ground, will be converted to ammonia. And the reason for that is hydrogen is difficult to move. Hydrogen takes high pressure, it takes temperature constraints. So to convert the hydrogen into ammonia, which is a much easier product to move for either retail or wholesale locations, or moving it down the coast, because currently right now ammonia is a huge fertilizer product for Iowa farmers. And roughly statistically, the United States imports about 50% to 60% of its ammonia, because the process to make ammonia is called the Haber-Bosch process and hasn't changed since the invention. Again, a very energy intensive process. So countries like China and Russia that are putting energy online faster than we are able to produce that. And so we import a lot of it. So there's a pipe that comes up to Iowa from the Gulf of Mexico that moves ammonia up here for a fertilizer product. So, we started to look at more how this could benefit not only financially the landowner or financially the state, but the important impact this could have on Iowa's ag economy by controlling at a local level and producing at a local level ammonia, which is one of our largest fertilizer products. And so that's kind of how that started. And then when I was able to explain to them, this is what's happening. This is the process that created it. These are the domes we're looking for. And here's the potential benefit, right? I mean, so we stitched it together. And we worked on this bill for 3 years. There was 3 years of conversations here at the Capitol. And as we worked, we saw more companies establish a presence in Iowa looking for hydrogen. So it wasn't just Klimesh is crazy thinking about something underground that doesn't exist anymore, right? Yeah. It was like, oh my, there's companies spending millions of dollars here drilling holes. We're looking for something, right? And so that's what kind of really pushed us into the bill we finished up this year. And this bill was introduced last session, 2 sessions ago we finished up, right? So this bill took 2 years to get through the process. And a lot of that was conversations about landowner protections. And then of course the severance tax component of the bill as well, which is something unique for the state of Iowa, which we've never dealt with underground natural resources or the ability to tax them. But the real benefit, I think, lies to the farmer at the end of the day. So we did some math, and basically right now, Iowa farmers pay about $200 to $250 more a ton for fertilizer for ammonia than Texas farmers do, let's say, for example, because of the piping and the transportation costs. And at the end of the day, when you boil the math down, if we can control that means of production for that input component here in Iowa, and manufacture it in Iowa, we can drive 25 to 30 cents more per bushel on the backside for the farmers upon harvest, which really is the potential for that. I mean, as we see rising input costs, we can control those and we can deliver more value to the farmer at the end. So it's really exciting possibilities, right, for the state of Iowa. Something we've never really had the opportunity to explore before, but very exciting times.
And I should mention the 2 legislators, for our friends listening here outside of the state of Iowa, those 2 lawmakers you mentioned, both rural, represent rural parts of the state, so they are familiar with the needs of farmers directly, frankly. You mentioned that they went to Wyoming. Are there other states that are already doing this, or at least thinking about it, that you could use as guides? Or were you thinking based on what you saw in Australia?
Yeah, so we were looking at other states for the pooling order language, right? Because if we're harvesting hydrogen or if we're harvesting natural gas or oil, it's the same. Essentially, there's a lot of similarities to it, right? We deal with a pooling order. We deal with surface components to recover those underground resources. And so there's a lot of similarity there. So we looked at those states. And we also looked at those states how to structure a severance tax, because that was something we were unfamiliar with in Iowa.
Sure.
So we looked at Wyoming and Oklahoma, and all those states have severance taxes, benefiting from their underground natural resources. So we kind of, looked at the pooling order part and the severance tax component. And I'm a big believer in not reinventing the wheel. I mean, these states have been doing this a lot longer. Over time, they've perfected their code sections and dealt with issues. The same landowner concerns and protections that we put in our bill. They've kind of perfected that craft for us. And since they were the first folks through the door, I'm more than happy to follow them. And so of course, there were some things in Iowa that we put in there that were, maybe you won't find in Wyoming, but again, dealing with, some nuances in Iowa, just because of our farm ground, right? I mean, I can drill in Wyoming and I'm in a pasture someplace on a cattle ranch, and that's different than, 90 CSR corn ground, for example, right? So we wanted to make sure that we took those things into consideration.
Can you talk a little more in depth about the severance tax? How does that work?
So the severance tax works where, like Wyoming and the other states that have it, once the component comes out of the ground, they charge a severance tax on volume, typically based off market, right? Wyoming, for example, last year was somewhere around $400 million in severance tax on their oil and gas, underground natural resources. So what we did was we took their model, how they taxed, created that tax structure based off of the market value, and then we created buckets to distribute those money in. And at the end of the day, right now we have no money to put in those buckets. But as we see hydrogen exploration continue in the state, we want to be prepared for that. And I think we took stuff primarily from Wyoming to do our severance tax component because they seem to really have a really good blueprint that we liked, and that allowed us then to put the money in different buckets. And the bulk of that money is going to the taxpayer relief fund, which again is to help drive down our income tax rate. Because several of the states, if you look at, a vast majority of states that have zero income tax have severance tax, right? I mean, like Wyoming, North and South Dakota, Texas. I mean, those states that have had natural resources to help augment their income streams have been able to achieve 0% income tax. And so we structured it, really similar in that way to benefit Iowans. We also have a direct benefit to every county from the pooling, from the severance tax, and the county that the pool is in gets an enhanced revenue stream. So, we kind of spread the money around every place in the state of Iowa.
And I would think this, I mentioned that in a previous career you did other things as a full-time gig, but you were the mayor of Spillville, so you can understand the needs of a rural community and the challenges of revenue, right?
100%.
So the county component to this, what is the potential for this if this really gets charging forward?
Well, the counties could, I mean, if it gets charging forward and we're able to, you take, let's use Wyoming's number, for example, let's use $400 million. The way the severance tax system is distributed, it will be an economic boon to every county in the state. In the counties that have the pooling order, and it will get an enhanced level. And then a huge chunk of the severance tax we put into the Road Use Tax Fund, the RUTF, which is a constitutionally secured fund to build roads and bridges, which directly, again, benefits small communities and counties that are struggling to find the dollars to keep up with that infrastructure. So we really were careful in crafting it to make sure that rural Iowa can benefit from this, as well as the landowners. This is mailbox money. I heard that term all the time, right? Because essentially, you're still able to farm around the surface equipment that's using to extract it, but then you're getting a payment every year, or you're getting compensated, for your underground resources while you're able to farm above ground. So really, the potential economic benefit for the state is exciting, Dave. I mean, I tell you, as I sit and ponder, well, the potential economic benefit, like we talked about, input costs on fertilizer, the revenue to the landowner and all the folks in the pooling order, the revenue going back to the state and the counties and the cities. It's an exciting opportunity for us.
You use the term buckets when you're talking about different buckets. You have, throughout your legislative career, looked at different buckets of possibilities, especially for rural areas, whether it's wind energy, solar energy. Now you're talking about hydrogen. How are you processing all of this when you see all the same numbers that we do, that 2/3, maybe more of the state's counties, and there are 99 in Iowa, have been shrinking in population. So that at its core is a huge challenge that I know other states are dealing with in their own way as well. So the potential to create wealth in some of these smaller population counties in the hopes that one day maybe they can reverse the trend and try to build their way out. How do you look at all of that? Because this is always something that's difficult, right? Like not to pick on Spillville, but when you have a population base of 400, you're not going to land a major manufacturing company that hires 1,000 people or something because the workforce is not there. So you have to figure out, hey, what can we do here to build our way out? So what goes through your mind as you're looking at this? Because we do in this country have so many rural areas that are going to have to become a bigger priority for folks as our economic industries continue to change, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of my priorities when I took the job as majority leader was to reverse that trend of depopulation in rural Iowa, right? I've lived in rural Iowa my whole life. And to your point, Spillville's never going to attract a manufacturing center, right? But at the end of the day, we can build those manufacturing centers that benefit rural Iowa. And when we talk about, that depopulation in rural Iowa, this is an opportunity for us to begin to fix that, right? I mean, so if you look at the potential downstream stuff that comes from successfully finding a really good deposit of geologic hydrogen. So that in and of itself, when they're drilling, first of all, you've got an economic impact. When they were drilling in Wright County, where I was up in Teward, you had a rig running 24/7 with employees. They were staying locally, and there was money flowing into that. Then you're successful in finding a deposit, you're going to want to build an ammonia facility really close to that. So you're looking at jobs created by that, jobs created by the facility, construction jobs. And then you look at the spillover that has into the ag economy, which allows, we help farmers lower their input costs, increase their yield. They have more money to spend in rural Iowa. I think, it's a spark, right? I mean, hydrogen is a potential spark for us to revitalize rural Iowa in ways that we probably can't even realize right now, Dave, to be honest with you, because that technology is still moving fast. They're still having conversations about what the best thing to do with it is. And internationally, we see a move to go to ammonia fuel cells, which is really kind of technology. We see ocean-going tankers utilizing that. Japan uses ammonia in place of natural gas. So the potential, as we convert hydrogen into ammonia, goes well beyond even just helping Iowa farmers. But again, if we're producing it here, it would be great to reverse the flow of that pipe coming up from the Gulf Coast and actually be exporting ammonia from Iowa to the world, which has potential for us. So what it all looks like yet, it's kind of hard. I sit and daydream about the potential, and it's exciting, and that's why we wanted to get that legislation done this year and done in a way that everybody was comfortable moving forward as we incentivize and continue to grow this potential resource for us.
You sort of read my mind, because I was thinking about, for our friends listening outside the border, the nature of Iowa's legislature is that in theory it's a part-time legislature. For those watching on video, I'll give you air quotes. For those listening audio only, just know I'm doing air quotes. As the senator can tell you, none of these positions are truly part-time, because even though the legislative session is largely January to April or May for the most part, a little different for you as a leader of the Senate, but you personally do not live in Des Moines.
No.
So you have a commute from Spillville that's about how long?
About 3 hours, a little
Okay,
over.
so you're splitting your time throughout the year, but that's a 3 hour one way, and when you go back and forth during the week, so that's 6 hours of windshield time. I was curious, I've joked with you in the couple of years I've known you, you listen to a lot of podcasts and all that kind of stuff because you're a very curious guy. But I would presume that during these long drives, whether you're going to the Capitol or coming back home for the weekend, you kind of let your mind wander a little bit about, dang, where could this go? So when you have those times and you're thinking about the potential of this hydrogen, like, where do you let yourself go? Is it that, hey, maybe this is the state's way one day of not having an income tax or having lower income tax? Is it property tax? Like, what is your sort of, your kind of fantasia dream that this could all lead to?
Yep, it's a great question. Well, first of all, I mean, I'm looking at getting us to a zero income tax state, right?
Okay.
I mean, other states that have, benefited from underground resources have done that. They've been able to achieve that. So zero income tax is something, we're at 3.8% right now. It takes $150 million to move down to 3.7. So every tenth of a point is another $150 million in revenue. And at the end of the day, I mean, the severance tax gives us the ability to start that path. And then just not only based off the tax, but based off the industrial growth that we'll see to service the hydrogen, the ammonia, whatever else comes along with that, that growth, that economic growth also fills Iowa's. I mean, it helps our coffers, right? So it also helps us find a path to zero income tax through that growth. And at the end of the day, I mean, really, there's a lot of exciting components to it. There's a lot of ways that we can benefit from it. And I don't mean to, go back to the same talking point, but just the potential to control that input cost locally in Iowa and not be held captive by national markets and energy trends, and to be able to give Iowa farmers the ability. I mean, imagine if Iowa farmers could develop a co-op and through that co-op produce their own ammonia, right? I mean, like we have co-ops now for fertilizer and stuff like that. I mean, imagine the ability for those folks to benefit from that, and then to benefit from that opening up export markets out of Iowa. I mean, so the potential is impressive. 0% income tax is where I think to go. And then, how do we incentivize other growth in the state of Iowa? I mean, if the state has resources to deploy to, through lower taxes, through other mechanisms to help, revitalize rural Iowa and grow additional businesses. And again, you look at, the potential for this. I see hydrogen as a hub, right? And then there's spokes to come off of that hub. And when you look at the overall picture, I daydream a lot about it going on the way back. I do. I spend a lot of time in the what if, in the ether, right? Thinking to myself, what could this do for Iowa? And it excites me. It makes me excited for the possibilities.
But
I listen to a lot of podcasts on energy. So I listen to a lot of hydrogen podcasts, because Iowa's not the only state where they're doing hydrogen development. They're doing hydrogen, searching for hydrogen in California currently, on the East Coast, in Nebraska, southern Minnesota, some other places. But Iowa, from all the folks I visit with the depth, to the deposits, the activation of the iron-rich rock seems to me to be the epicenter from everybody I talk to, right? So in certain places in Minnesota, they have an iron activation of 50%, which means that the hydrogen is not as prevalent there as it is in Iowa with 100% iron rock activation in their test holes. So, Iowa's not the only state that's being considered, but Iowa seems to be the epicenter for it.
And I'm not going to put you on the spot about national or international politics, but as we've seen, to your point, you've got this Russia-Ukraine thing has been going on for 3 years or whatever. So we're not really going to be in a position where we want to trust Russia with all of our being, in any kind of trading partner. China is always a wild card. As you and I record this, we're trying to figure out if we have some kind of deal with Iran. So for the American farmland owners, they could be a lot better served if they are domestically produced materials that they can go after. So this could be another avenue to achieve that.
Yep, 100%. Why would we want to have any of those adversaries that you mentioned have control of ammonia production, which is essential for us growing food, right? And if we can capture that, even if it's at 50%, and move that back into the state, we control that means of production now, right? Which is essential, I think. And it puts Iowa farmers and farmers all across the country. I mean, let's be honest, right? I mean, this is not just an Iowa deal. Ammonia is utilized in Illinois and Indiana, every place they grow corn and soybeans. But to put that back in the hands of United States agriculture, right? To be able to say, okay, we don't have to import ammonia anymore. You're in control of that. Gives them some certainty in that input cost, which gives them more certainty, in the money they'll make at the end of the harvest in the market. And I think that's really essential, because that certainty is important, right? I mean, I want to know what my future looks like. If I make an investment in something, how does that benefit me at the end of the day? And I think it's within our grasp to be able to control that.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate the deep dive in all of this. Really appreciate the conversation.
We just scratched the surface on it, Dave. We just scratched the surface. No pun intended.
We need to do a part 2 then. Book it now.
Sign me up. You betcha. Thank you for your time today. It's been great talking to you about this. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You bet.
He is Senator Mike Klimesh. And if you were listening to this, listen to that voice. Yes, he once worked in local radio. Now, we don't talk about radio, but we do share some other details about the senator and his ideas. You can find that in the American Farmland Owner newsletter. It's the place where landowners get their news. It's free and it comes out every week. You can check it out now at AmericanFarmlandowner.com. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast, and thanks for caring about the future of our farmland.